families is that oftentimes like, well, maybe if I take this angle, or maybe if I try this, or maybe no, just sometimes you just need to stop, acknowledge that you did the best that you could, and other people's behavior is outside of your control. We only have control over what we do, what we say, and sometimes how we feel. And if others aren't willing to play ball, then so be it. But that can't. Hello, and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So as the holiday season approaches, we want to discuss the dubbed most wonderful time of the year. So in North America, typically this starts out with American Thanksgiving. So at this point in time, we are right into it. So oftentimes, when we're watching movies and TV, it is portrayed as this wonderful, beautiful time where families come together lovingly and spend time together. But the reality is, and I've learned this more and more in my role as a therapist, the month of December rolls around, a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress starts to bubble up because there's a lot that comes along with the holiday season that isn't quite so magical. So among the top issues that arise, financial strain is one of the big ones, general stress, old family wounds that come up, loneliness comes up. And interestingly, over the years, Christmas used to be one of my most favorite times of the year. But as I've learned more and more about the struggles that people go through, really what I've been left with is a sense of disappointment at how difficult this can be for people. So, Oren, I know that you've done a lot of interviews in the past about this very topic. So Let's start out by maybe talking about some of the things that you've noticed, some of the things that have been asked of you.
Sure, people. So I have a catchphrase, and I guess I'll share it. I haven't shared it with everybody before, but I will. It's wee-wee-a, or woo-ye, however you want to do it. It's W-E-W-Y-E. And there's a bit of a backstory. I won't get into the whole backstory, but basically, if I said to you, let's say you told me something happened. Let's say I went to my family for Christmas, and Uncle Bob got drunk again. Okay, and he made a fool of himself, and I gave him this expensive bracelet that I wanted him to look at, and he broke it because he was drunk. Anyway, you said all that, and if I said to you, if I texted you, what else would you expect? Okay, just text that. No tone. Just what else? What tone would you infer from that? What else would you expect?
Probably like, well, what else did you expect?
Right. So there's condemnation, a bit of it's critical, right? It's insulting almost, right? So I'm a fan of irony. So I took this critical, insulting phrase and made it the most empowering phrase possible. So what else would you expect? I tell my patients, so W-E-W-Y-E, woo-ye, woo-ye. I got to find a better one. But anyway, so I tell patients, it's a simple, quick way to remind yourself that, in fact, I'm in control here. If I can predict something, so when I say that to a patient, I say, I've never met your Uncle Bob or whatever else, but even I knew it was going to happen. So how could you not predict it, right? And again, I don't say it in an insulting way. I say it in a very compassionate, but it's to empower yourself. Because when someone realizes, oh yeah, I know what's going to happen most likely, or I have a pretty good way, right, to predict. So I can either avoid it, or prepare myself for it, or mitigate the damage, or whatever else. But, being prepared for something, even if it's not something great, is far better than an unpleasant surprise. So I tell people, no better time than Christmas or the holiday season to employ. There is no better time than those times to employ it, because unfortunately, as you're saying, there's a lot of, let's say, expectations baked into the holidays. People have these fantasies, the most wonderful time of the year, etc. Right? And when people are disappointed, when people are caught off guard and so on, it really, it's bad enough in a normal situation. But when people have these illusions, these fantasies, like it's going to be great this time, even the last 30 times were not, right? You got to be prepared for all of this. And whether it's for yourself, whether it's preparing the family, saying, okay, you know what, Uncle Bob's going to do this time. So either, let's say it's with your partner, preparing for that, or making sure the kids aren't in the vicinity of Uncle Bob, whatever the case may be. So I tell people, woo-ye, wee-ye, whatever. And it doesn't have to be for holidays, obviously. It's for any situation. It's empowering to say, I can predict, as long as I'm prepared to deal with reality and not allow myself to succumb to fantasy. So that's just the first thing I'm going to say. And we'll talk about the specific topics in a second, but it's a real different mindset. And most people, they don't want to think this way because they would like to maintain this illusion, this fantasy that somehow this time it's going to be different. But why would it be after 20, 50, 30 times previously being the
And
same?
to that, I often tell clients, and it's an unpopular opinion, but it's true, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So we do know this, we just sometimes don't want to accept it.
Exactly. And that's the thing with cognitive behavior therapy or other interventions where we're supposed to use our higher level functioning, our prefrontal cortex to say, well, I recall that, blah, blah, blah. But when you're in a heightened state, it's hard to remember what we've been taught. But a simple catchphrase, woo yeah, however you want to pronounce it. I tell my patients, put it on your knuckles, W-E-W-Y-E. Even if it's not a real tattoo, it's a metaphoric tattoo. And some patients do that. They just look at their hands and go, oh yeah, I remember it. It's quick. And it's a bit of it won't change your feelings that much, but it provides a bit of a buffer. It's a bit of a jolt. It's a bit of a break in the system, right? That allows you, now I can employ what I've learned.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that strategy. So I wonder, as far as the specifics that we get into, do you want to start with talking about some family of origin wounds? Because I think that's probably what overarches a lot of what people experience.
Exactly. And so again, we're fighting against this thing that we want to be real, this fantasy, this illusion, this, again, most wonderful time of the year. And number one, so it's not going to be that way most likely, and for many families. All right, in the present. But then, as you say, the family wounds, the wounds of the past, all the times before then that you were disappointed, that things didn't turn out and so on. And then more important than that, layered on top of that is, and this is what people really need to understand, there's several layers to this, is those hurts, the wounds, the disappointments, those happen when you were a child. And if they happen when you were a child at a very heightened state, and maybe your parents were tense as well because of the things that we're going to be talking about by finances or pressures and so on, whatever the case may be, if it happens when you're a child, then when they get triggered again, and the strongest triggers are the ones that are closest to what originally happened. So what better trigger than your own family, your own parents? Like these are it's almost a exact replica of what happened previously. Maybe even the same home that you grew up in, whatever the case may be. You're not walking, let's say you're a 30-year-old person. You're not walking in there as a 30-year-old person. You're walking as a 5-year-old person because the emotional, the physiological, all the conditioning, the wounds and everything that happened back then, those are what are getting triggered. And so we're not acting like calm, rational beings. We're acting like children who, and it's not insulting to say that, right? It's just, these are long.
That's just the way it is.
It's the way it is. Psychological, emotional, physiological triggers that just get released. And then on top of that, and here's the part I always tell people, if you have siblings, now the sibling rivalry, the wounds, the hurts and everything like that, those get triggered as well. And here's the crazy part. So again, you can be 30, you can be 40 years old, and you can have a sibling around the same age. But if those problems weren't resolved when you were a child, well, again, the child brain, so to speak, is being activated. And now, I don't care how old you are, I don't care how successful you are, how professional you are. Right now, if the brother and sister are fighting, as kids, who's supposed to take care of the problem?
Mom and dad.
Mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
And when so we have that expectation again, logically. And I've spoken with so many patients, they know logically that's not the way it should be. But once again, those triggers, they are there, and triggers say pshaw to logic. Triggers laugh at logic, and triggers will always override logic. So we have that double whammy and the double hurt. And again, I just might sound crazy, but people who've been through this, if you really step back and think about it, and you're humble enough to go, I can admit my foibles. I can admit that I am not this professional, mature, responsible person I want to be in those situations. If you look at it honestly, you'll go, yeah, that's actually what happened. And then now we resent our parents, and the parents, all they want is a nice, quiet Christmas. And by the way, you're the one who made this in the first place because you were in charge 20, 30, 50 years ago. That was you. It was on you, and you screwed up back then. You don't get it off that easily, but that's all they want. Now they're guilting you. And now you got the guilt wrapped in as well. So it's a cacophony of emotions that are just raging inside of you. And again, it's not an adult trying to contain them all. It's a child who feels just overwhelmed by everything and wondering, why can't I deal with it? As a child, you can't deal with it very well. As an adult,
right.
You expect to be able to deal with it, but you can't.
Yeah.
So,
but if you're being zapped back to that time where you weren't equipped to deal with it, then it feels almost the exact same.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating. And it's not just you now, it's all the other people. And depending on the family dynamic, if you were always the black sheep or the trouble or whatever, now, even though 5 or 8 or 10 or 20 people, depending on children and cousins and so on, are making a mess, you might be the one who gets singled out. Right. And then you're seeing all these dynamics at play, and you're seeing these two cousins ganging up on this person or your parent and your sibling, making you feel bad, or they're attacking mom or dad. It's again, it's so messy as adults. And if you just started from day one in the situation, it'd be hard enough to deal with. But it's not day one. It's thousands of days of, again,
Yeah.
of long held hurts.
Yeah. So I want to dig into this a little bit deeper. I want to reference a great book that I looked at the other day. So it's written by Vienna Farron, and the book is called The Origins of You. So she talks about these family origin wounds that can really be triggered during the holiday season. So the main ones that she discusses, and we'll dig into them a bit deeper, are worthlessness, belonging, prioritization, trust, and safety.
Mm.
So with regard to feeling worthy, so either being made to feel worthless or the desire to feel worthy is often tied to self-esteem, to feeling valued. And as you said, Oren, if the historical dynamic is that one hasn't felt valued in the family, that stuff can absolutely come up. As far as belonging, this relates to our feeling of connection and acceptance. So I think that ties into that whole black sheep idea, where if we've historically, or one has historically been the black sheep in the family and not felt accepted, those are the things that can come up as well. With regard to prioritization, this one's really interesting because it can be, something as simple as one not remembering one's dietary restrictions. So not feeling like you're a priority, not feeling like people understand, who you are, what you're about. And it can even, in the Christmas season, relate to not buying someone a meaningful gift, or not having, the appearance of putting thought into that. So not being made to feel like you're a priority in that family. As far as the next one of trust, this is one of the most important things that comes into play with relationships, whether it's family relationships, romantic relationships, whatever the case may be. And this trust or this mistrust can exist, potentially poor attachment as a child, or, in the family in general. And, it can be from one large action. It can be from a number of small disappointments. But in any event, to me, I feel that if trust isn't there, it's going to really erode a lot of things. And then lastly, safety. This can be one's physical safety, psychological safety. And this can stem from things such as neglect, from witnessing abuse, from experiencing physical and emotional abuse, any number. That feeling of safety, if that's not there, it certainly does not lend to a happy interaction.
Exactly. And then add to all of that the complication of maybe it's hard enough to keep you in the family. And then you bring, let's say, if you have a spouse or a partner, right? And then bringing them in. And once again, you're an adult, but you feel like this child, and everything you just mentioned that makes you feel exposed. You're vulnerable if any of these factors are at play. Especially, it's not usually just one. There's a list of them. So now you have your partner as well. Are they going to have my back? Do they really understand what's going to happen? And then dealing with their family and so on. So once again, I think this is the drinking game. I think is going to be trigger today. The drinking game word be trigger. And people, again, just cut yourself a bit of slack. The whole part about wuya or wuye. The reason I say that is, again, it sounds like it's condemnatory, but it's not. It's actually empathetic and recognizing that, yes, okay, it's not just about I can predict this and everything. It's also a reminder that these triggers, whatever you want to call them, the hurts, they were installed when we were much younger. And so we're being brought back to an emotional state when we weren't capable of handling it. Because a lot of people, they get upset. And then again, the pressure of the partner or children. If you have children, I don't want to be a bad model for them, and I don't want to throw their grandma under the bus or blah, blah, right? Being able to realistically and compassionately say, this is what's most likely going to happen. I have to prepare for this. I need to prepare my family for this in ways that are age appropriate. If you go, okay, we're going over to the hellscape right now with the evil grandmother and incompetent grandpa kids. If you do it like that, that's going to ruin it for them. So, and there's pressure there as well. You don't want to ruin Christmas for those kids. You don't want to be as bad as your parents ruining for your kids like they ruined your Christmas, right? So there's all this pressure. If you just say, here's what's most likely going to happen, And I know in that state, I'm going to be like a kid. Okay. So as an adult right now, days or weeks or months before I go, what can I do to try to mitigate the damage? And in many cases, I tell people when it's a really dysfunctional family or they're the black sheep or whatever, I say, is there at least one person in the family of origin who has your back or that you can consider an ally? Is there any way to have them talk to somebody? Is there any way to have a bit of a, an escape room, so to speak? If things are getting tough, you just go talk to them or something like that, or talking directly. I've had many patients say this. They say to the parent or whoever or sibling, it's Christmas. I know I know we're supposed to meet. Like you don't read their mind or anything like that. You don't do it in a condescending manner. You do it and you come from a position of humility, humbleness. I just want to keep the peace. You're not lecturing or anything like that. You're just saying, hey, you know what? How can we, sort of just make this day or week or however long you're there more tolerable? And saying, how can we make it great? Well, that's not realistic. Woo yay.
Yeah.
So how can we make it tolerable? Let's get through this let's not ruin it for dad or mom or whatever the case may be. So I say, plan ahead, find at least one person. And again, if it's the person that you have the conflict with, sending an email or a text beforehand. If you don't think you can have the conversation beforehand, face to face or over the phone or whatever, then write it down. And just, again, when you do it though, you have to watch it because all those triggers are ramping up and you might not realize it, but there might be a phrase that you use. There might be a word that if you were really on the ball in your best game, you wouldn't use it. So maybe have someone read it over beforehand, someone, with an objective lens, so to speak, who can say, you know what, that does sound a little bit preachy, or that is a bit of an insult, even if you didn't mean it.
Yeah, and as far as some more specific strategies that I recommend to clients during this time of year, and really in general when they're getting together with family, it really depends if you're visiting locally or going away to visit and so on. But a few different things. So one being, try your best to, as you said, of course, prepare, know what to expect. Be realistic about what it may look like, but also you can time limit it. So let's say it is something, that's going to be a few hour long event. If all you can tolerate based on your previous experiences is maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, then frame this visit around that. And if you get to that 2 hour mark and it's maybe not so bad, then you can stay. If it's awful, then you can leave. You've fulfilled that commitment to yourself and you are completely free to leave, because at the end of the day, you're not a child anymore. You are an adult and you can leave when you feel that you need to. A second strategy, if you're visiting somebody out of town, visiting family out of town, maybe opt to not stay in the family house. You could always get a hotel, get an Airbnb, stay somewhere else so you have that separation and that space, so that at the end of these triggering, difficult gatherings, you can kind of take some reprieve and have your own space to decompress. Anyone who works with me knows that I'm huge about exercise. So any way that you can stay on your exercise routine, which can be hard if you're visiting out of town, but, go for a walk. Have that time to really de-stress and decompress and own some of your time with that routine.
Right. So you mentioned about time and location, so to speak. So the time limited part is really good. And you can. The thing is, there's another potential drinking game word is boundaries. I think today boundaries is going to be really big. You can set that boundary ahead of time with, let's say, the parents or somebody else. Having a cover story is good. If they expect you to, if you say, look, I can only spend a couple of hours, whatever, if everyone's expecting you to spend much longer, you make up an excuse of why you can't stay that long, because you want everybody to save face, not just yourself, but the parents, grandparents, whatever else. So having a good cover story is really important. And then, as you say, if you need long, if you can spend longer, then you can have like a backup excuse. Oh, I thought I had to go back and do this thing, but it was taken care of, so it's okay. I can stay a bit longer, even overnight, for example. If someone says, I don't think we're going to be able to, there's something that has to happen, and then you pretend you get a text or something. Oh, it's all good. We're able to stay. Now, some family members might be upset, like, oh, should I save the room for you or someone else? Again, this is why you prepare ahead of time and you let them know we're not trying to play games and everything like that. You're just setting boundaries. I'm going to have a double drinking game. Right? We're just setting boundaries, and that's it. And letting people know, here's the thing, when it comes to boundaries, Most times when people hear that, they automatically think barriers. They think you're putting up a wall or something. And I've had this lecture with so many, with literally thousands of students and patients saying, no, boundary is simply communicating what you're able to tolerate, what needs you have, what expectations, what is reasonable. Okay. And that's from your end. And the other person has to set their boundaries as well. And if someone's going to breach those boundaries, then you have to be prepared to either, sustain them, maybe erect them a little bit harder, like more solid, maybe a little bit higher, maybe it starts to become a barrier. Maybe you have to totally cut the person off at some point. But until that point that you have to do that, we're trying to have a healthy, mature, mutually rewarding, mutually acceptable dynamic or dynamics. So that's all that you're doing. And for some people, depending on the nature of the family, they can say it outright to the person in charge, the matriarch, the patriarch, whoever. They can say that and say, hey, this is what I'm doing and so on. Other times they just can't do that. The parent might be impossible to deal with.
Yeah.
So you make sure you have that one ally, the cousin, the sibling, whatever, or aunt who can sort of run interference a little bit, who can kind of sort of soften the blow and everything like that. You want to make sure that you have, you don't want to ruin it for everybody else, because the problem is, and so many people do this, they feel it, they say it, which is, if I leave early, if I don't stay at the home, if I do this, and that, I know I'm going to feel terribly guilty. Right. And I can't believe it was Christmas and I did this and I walked out. It's like, well, as a child, sure, you're made to feel guilty if your parents guilted you, right? Which most parents will do to some degree, right? As an adult, if you're setting boundaries, okay, you can say to your parent, with all due respect, look, you know what? This is my boundary. And explain to them. And if you don't like the word boundary, then don't say boundary. Just saying, this is just what I'm hoping for, et cetera, et cetera. Use soft language, but let them know, look, if things aren't going well, I'm going to let you know, I'm going to point it out, quietly, not in front of everybody else, and say, hey, you know what? Can we sort of avoid this topic, or can you lay off that, or something like that? And if I have to say it the second time, I'm not going to say it the second time. I'm going to tell you one time beforehand, nice and respectfully. And if it's still continuing, I'm going to have an excuse to leave. I'm not going to, ruin the party or whatever. I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus. I'm just going to find a way for us to exit, respectfully, quietly, and so on. All right. And if you tell it to the person and they still can't respect your boundaries, then you just have to be able to maintain it, stick to what you said, leave, and be able to tell yourself, and I always tell people this, I know it's just words, right? It's not going to work. You're still going to feel guilty and everything, but we're just trying to reduce that guilt somewhat. You're able to say, I took the high road. I did everything possible that any reasonable adult would have accepted and would have respected. And if my parent or whoever else, sibling, whatever, couldn't respect it, I have every right. And it goes back to what you're saying about self-worth. This is your chance to exercise and to show your self-worth and say, I have the right to be able to extricate myself from a situation that is not comfortable for me, doesn't work for me. And I gave them a warning ahead of time. I didn't just sandbag them and suddenly up and leave. I told them, if we want this to work, here's what we need to do. And if there's anything that I can do or shouldn't do or whatever, please let me know so that I, equally make this a good time for you as well. So that's the thing about time. I don't know if you want to add anything to that or the time.
Yeah, I don't. So there is something I wanted to add in, but I don't want to completely veer off. But I think that, whether right now or a little bit later in this conversation, I think it is really important for us to address the fact that, however, sometimes these strategies just aren't going to work. And some families, I've heard this term no contact a lot lately, where they make the decision to just completely cut off because despite their best efforts, despite the attempts to put in good boundaries and even the person who is going no contact has evaluated and identified what some of the problems are, there's just no winning. So I think we should at some point talk about that as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think we should. And again, to have that happen on Christmas of all times, I don't want to ruin it for it. Well, it doesn't matter when it was. It could be a funeral. It could be a birthday, whatever, wedding even. If it's that toxic, that it's not healthy for you and probably not for your kids or partner, whoever else like that, you do need to set that boundary and maintain it. Okay, that's just a fact. So yeah, I think we should get back to that at some point. And then the thing about about like not staying at the home, for example, there will be people who rightfully, they have every right to say it. They go, yeah, well, I can't afford a hotel. or an
Fair
Airbnb
enough.
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so that might be a limitation. And so if you play again, if you're being realistic, if you are using Wuye, then what was my drinking? It was triggers. That's it. Yeah, if you're using, I thought Wuye could be my drinking game as well, drinking word game. But if you're realistic and everything like that, plan ahead. Maybe save up the money. Maybe not have a coffee or the third coffee for
Yeah.
numerous weeks. It will pay for that room if you need to do that. Or you make that long drive home or something like that. But try your best, and that's why it's so important to live in reality, not fantasy. And that's the
Yes.
thing. People want Christmas to be that time of the magical time, that fantasy time. Well, reality doesn't take a break. So
Yeah.
you have to just even going on vacation, a beautiful vacation. Well, if you and your partner always get into a fight when you go on vacation, that you have to prepare ahead of time. Don't think this time is going to be different. Wuye is there for a reason. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to to acknowledge that there would be some people who say, look, I just either have a big family, it's too expensive, all the hotels are booked. There's whatever the case may be. I get it, but you have to think, how much value do I put on my well-being, my mental health, the health of my own family? And if you amortize, let's say the hotel's $500, because it's Christmas season, they're going to jack up the price, whatever, worst case scenario. Well, amortize that $500 over the next 20, 30, 50 years of your life, however long you've got, and it's not that much. If that's what it takes to maintain, again, your own sense of your own well-being, or the well-being of your family, or the grander family, then you make that investment if need be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think absolutely looking at over the next 20, 30 years, but even over the next several weeks, right? So if you're able to avoid some turmoil by investing a little bit of money, you're going to save yourself a heck of a lot of grief, even over the weeks following that event.
Right. And so, and speaking of money, that's the other stress, as you mentioned, the financial stress. And yes, I know I see people start shopping, months before, because they like to go all out, and they run themselves ragged, or there's all these Christmas parties they have to go to and all these other things. Again, it's boundaries. If you can handle 3 events over the holidays, then you do those 3 events and you prioritize. And that's what boundaries. Oh God, I'm gonna burn my throat all day. Okay. I've got to stick to tradition, but that's what, my gosh, boundaries are all about. It's about making sure you set limits, things that work for you. And going back to what I said about the guilt with the family, it's the same with friends or colleagues. If you know that if you don't attend this particular, let's say, work party, you're not going to get that promotion, for example, or your job's on the line or something, then whatever the case may be, you make an appearance, you go no matter what. Right. But if there's 10 events and 3 of them, you know that you can't make at least, 3 of them, because it's just going to wear you down or whatever else like that. You prioritize and you do it in the most respectful way. And once again, if you lay things out, say, hey, I'm really sorry, I can't, blah, 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 blah. And, again, it's not that important. It's just whatever kind of event. It's not a special one. It's just something that someone wants you to go to. You have to be able to, at night, say, I took the high road. I didn't not show, I didn't just no show them. I told them I couldn't go. Yeah. And maybe I made a lie, an excuse, or maybe I told them, look, I'm really struggling right now. Think about that. I just, everyone, when they hear it, it makes so much sense, but they don't live it. So, which is, if I tell somebody, look, I really, really want to go, but I am stressed out, or I am depressed, or something happened, I've got migraines, I can't make it. And the person is what? You're not going to go to my party, right? It sounds like a parent here, but what kind of a friend is that if they can't accept your limits or your boundaries?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and
Mm-hmm.
I think what that comes down to, because I can hear people, and I know I've even heard from my clients over the years, like, easier said than done, but it is a matter of learning the strategy of how to say no, and being realistic about what your capacity is, what you can do, what you can afford to do, because like you said, if there's 10 parties, that can certainly add up. But I think there's also perhaps some reflection on one's core values that's important here, in terms of, why are you doing all of this? Are you doing it because you're people pleasing? Are you doing it because you truly want to see people? Are you strapping yourself financially because you really love giving gifts and making people feel great, or is it more out of obligation? So with regards to that financial strain, I think it's really important to not necessarily just follow what everybody else is doing, but reflect on what actually is realistic and makes sense for you and your family.
Right. And I did this many years ago with my own family. And for the most part, people stick to it. I don't even remember how many years ago, but everyone agreed, which is, look, Christmas for us, it's about family. That's
Yeah.
it. It's about sharing time. And it's for the children basically. And for the adults, it's just getting together and seeing each other, because maybe we haven't seen each other for a few months, whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. So I put a moratorium on presents years ago.
Same here. Exact same story. Yep.
Took off all the pressure. Kids, yes, you want to get presents for the kids, fine.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And if you really, really need, there's two things. One is, again, the whole hell of trying to find something and what are they going to like or whatever. Worst case scenario, getting a gift card. Yeah. It's like, again, if you feel that you have to give something, well, it's not this, whatever the presents are, you've made it into that. It should be this way. It should be that way. No, there's no should. Okay. It's how you deal with it. It's how you frame it. It's how you, again, set the expectations. All right. And again, it made life much easier for everybody. And if someone wanted to get a gift for one person, or that's the other thing, other families, they get, okay, one gift for one person. It's almost like the Secret Santa kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same idea. It's much more feasible. And same with friends. You can do that with your friends as well. Say, hey, you know what? I'd like to meet you, or I want to do this or that. Can we not do gifts? Because that's the other thing. Because it's not just family, it's also friends and so on. So it can be very expensive. It can be time consuming. It can be very stressful, although online shopping makes it somewhat easier, but still the financial repercussions. So once again, as you said earlier, if you're a people pleaser, then reframe this as this season. And we're going to, we might talk about, well, I know we'll talk about resolutions in a different podcast. Okay. But you can say this season, I am going to deal with this whole mess better. I will set limits. I will learn to say no respectfully and so on. I will learn to start to live with the guilt. And once again, people have to understand if you do something because there's a real life consequence to not doing it, that's different than saying I do it because otherwise I'm going to feel guilty. Those are two very different. One thing's going on in the real world, one's going on in your head. The real world is what has the implications. The stuff in your head, you're able to learn to, if you can, and we do this in therapy all the time, learn to contain, learn to frame it in a much more positive, realistic way that's going to help you, as opposed to cause you all this stress and distress.
And a great way that I often guide people in checking that guilt is ask yourself the question, well, guilt usually implies that I did something wrong. Did I do something wrong here? Or is it just the pressure of what's happening in my family, in my circle, whatever the case may be? So that's often a good way to reframe it. But back to, the financial strain. And I think we're throwing out a lot more strategies than usual in this episode, because I think this season is all about being strategic and figuring out the best way to handle it. And of course, there's families out there that, do get along and do have a great time during the holidays, but I'm inclined to believe that more people struggle than the opposite of that. So in terms of, one's immediate family, and not that this is necessarily going to work for everybody, but we've taken the whole presents thing a step further in our household. So when I had my son, a group of my friends and I actually just happened to have babies at the same time.
Right.
Most of them had older kids, so I learned a lot of wisdom from these other moms, which was really cool. So really early on, I learned from a friend of mine the strategy that she was using with her older daughter and was planning to use with the daughter that was on the way. So for Santa, which I know is a whole other story, and whether people believe in that or not, or want to, whatever, but the Santa gift, rather than it being ridiculous and having piles and piles of gifts, because I'm sure all of us on Christmas morning have seen people's posts with these towers of gifts in front of the tree. It's disgusting, frankly. But anyways, 4 gifts from Santa. So something you want, something you need, something to wear, something to read. And that's it. You write your letter. Those are the 4 things that you get from Santa. And that's that. So we've implemented this in our household forever. And it really causes our son to stop and think about what he really does want, rather than, just rattling off a million different things. And whether it's because of this or because of the values in our household, probably both. He's not a very materialistic kid. And even at Christmas time, we're like, what do you want? He's like, I don't know. And I'm pretty sure he's figured out that there isn't a Santa at this point, but he still plays along and we're waiting for that list. But it
Right.
really does help to, again, I think, remove that materialisticness from, if that's the word, materialistic nature from kids from an early age.
Yeah. And again, you said earlier about easier said than done. I get it. I understand when kids are facing all this pressure from the other kids and they're trying to outdo themselves or they want to be at least on par with everyone else. I understand. And that's, again, it's about setting limits and boundaries with your own kids, which is, and again, I feel terrible. I do when your child wants something and everyone else is getting it and you have to disappoint them. Well, guess what? This is what good parents do. And I hate to say it, but good parents have to teach children, A, you don't get everything you want. And B, there will be disappointments. I mean, that's a reality. And again, if you frame this as a parent, forget Christmas, forget whatever. Okay. I have to think of my child's life. Now, we've said this before. As parents, our job is to teach children or is to raise children who will become independent one day. And one of those tasks or abilities that they need to be able to develop is the ability to deal with disappointment. Right. And saying this to a 5-year-old child, it's not going to resonate with them. They're going to say, I hate you, blah, blah. But again, a parent needs to learn to parent without guilt. Parenting from guilt is one of the worst types of has predictable consequences. So the child needs to be able to learn to deal with disappointment. And as you're saying, we're trying to make kids not so materialistic. You and I were speaking in another podcast that will come out at some point about how society has, I mean, this is nothing earth shattering. Everyone knows this, but people aren't doing anything about it. Many people aren't. But the fact that we've become so materialistic that children's values and priorities have just gone crazy. I mean, we've always been like that for many, many years, a consumerist society, but it's only got worse. And with social media, it's ramped up even more. So parents, our job is to be able to help children have some kind of buffer against all these stresses, to be able to deal with disappointment, to recognize, oh, you're not going to, there's a kid down the street who's got a much bigger house, a much bigger car, or whatever else like that. And to learn that one's value does not derive from how many, what kind of sneakers they have or whatever else. And again, I know it sounds great on paper, and I know there's not one teen or kid or very few who would actually accept that. Right. So you got to put up with years of a kid begrudging you, being upset with you, whatever else like that. But if you deal with it in the right way, if you just go, well, too bad, and you slam the door, right, that child is going to have a lot of resentment. But if you do it in the way that you're describing, explaining it to the child, we've talked about this in a previous podcast about this, authoritative parenting, explaining about why this is the case and being empathetic and going, yeah, I know, I would love to get you this. I work my ass off just to pay the bills or whatever else like that. Be grateful. Then we shift to gratitude. You and I have talked about before. Okay. Look, I know it's not going to sound great, but be grateful that you actually have a home. Whereas other kids, once again, none of this does any good in the moment. The child's still going to be upset. But one day down the road, they're going to look back and they're going to realize that my parent actually raised me to be a good, decent human being. And it doesn't have to be that late, even 18. If you do it right, 16 to 18 years old, it starts to sink in with a person. And again, they may not act that way. They may not say, hey, thank you for that. But at some point, it will register. And even at 16, 18, they start to sort of understand it. And you are raising a good, decent human being with good values.
Yeah. And to take that even a layer deeper, right? So when parents do that, I think that it's likely well-intentioned. They just want their kid to, whether it's fit in or have, the same stuff as their peers and whatever. But in doing so, if one is financially strapping the family, you're not helping. In fact, there's studies that show that parents who are chronically financially stressed increase the stress hormones within their children, which in turn is going to cause some physiological and long-term harm. And I don't say that to fearmonger, but reframing it as, while you think you may be helping, you could actually be doing more harm than good.
Excellent point. And once again, your kid is not going to appreciate anything that we're saying at this point.
No.
But if you can do that again and you suck it up, so to speak, I know I never use that in therapy, but again, this is just a podcast. But again, just frame it as if I really, really want to do right by my child, I need to set those boundaries. I need to say no. I need to do this and that. But again, in a compassionate way. And just, as you say, reframing it either as, well, I say both, as you're saying, if I don't do that, My kid's going to become a mess. They might become an entitled brat. They might have unrealistic expectations. They might have this neurosis that now they need to always, sacrifice themselves and give, and be a people pleaser. If you're a people pleaser, right, you're going to raise children who either are entirely spoiled, rotten brats or people pleasers themselves. Okay. So reframe that as, I don't want whatever happened to me. However, I developed this mindset and way of being. I don't want to burden my own child with the same type of problem. So framing it that way, number one. And then number two, the positive side of that is if I stick to my guns, if I really push hard and do it in the right, compassionate way, eventually my child will be, he or she will have a much healthier mindset and will be a much better functioning member of society for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back to the whole no contact idea. So what I'll say about that is, most of the time in therapy, I'll recommend this as a last resort because it can come with a lot of, fallout and negative consequences. But I also acknowledge that sometimes, when people are dealing with family members who are unreasonable, maybe even if they're mentally unwell and aren't able to listen to this, level of reason or have the compassion or whatever the case may be, sometimes that is the only choice. So I'm wondering, what are some of the circumstances or strategies that you can broach here that we can talk a bit more about?
Well, okay. So I always, as you say, it's a last resort. I say that to people as well. And so there's a few things. I've got like about a dozen right now. So I'm going to try to just deal with a couple. So I'm going to sort of switch gears for a second to kind of take the most, let's say, I'm going to accelerate and accentuate beyond what we're talking about, which is I have patients from a bunch of different cultures where they say, and there's, I don't want to mangle it, but I think it's like the 1818 rule or 1825 rule, where they basically say that, that they were told by their parents, their culture, their background, that the parent's responsible for taking care of the kid for the first 18 years of life. And then the kid's responsible for taking care of the parent for the last 18 or last 25 or whatever years. Okay. And I've had many patients say that because I've got patients from a variety of backgrounds. And I tell them, I say, I get it. I understand. That's what you were raised to believe by your parents, by your grandparents, by the culture, whatever. I said, but here's the thing. That arrangement, that agreement, that contract, all right, you signed it under duress. Hell, you didn't even sign it. It was imposed on you. You did not ask to be born. If a parent is birthing you, they've made that decision. It's their responsibility to take care of you for the first however many years. Yes. And if they want you to take care of them later in life or do right by them or keep them in your life in any way, they have to earn that. And people don't like to hear that. I say, but they need to earn it. And I've got many, many people who they were so horrifically abused, mistreated, neglected, and they still are breaking their backs trying to take care of an elderly parent or in whatever age it may be, because you're talking more generally. But I just want to, I'm just using this as one of the most extreme cases because this is where people feel the most guilt. Because now the tyrant, the monster, whoever, well, they're old and frail, and it's hard to see. It's how do you turn your back on someone like that? Well, it's pretty easy when every time you see the monster, even though they're frail or whatever, they've got the claws, they still have the laser beams, they still know how to tear you apart. And on top of that, in many cases, the person is, and again, I know I'm going off for a little bit, but I just want, if I just want people to know that I've helped people deal with these situations, which is the most guilt-inducing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? If they can learn to deal with this, you can deal with almost any situation. And here's the other part. They have a partner or spouse, whatever, who has seen how much stress that family member has caused them, whether it's a parent, grandparent, sibling, whatever. They see it. And yet they see their partner running around like mad, trying to please them, trying to placate them, trying to do right by them. And they're going, why? So not only does it break, like, not only do I despise that person because I've had to deal with their wrath and I'm not their family member. Okay. Number one. Not only that, but then I see what they've done to you. I see how much they've hurt you. And then third, I see how much, again, this whole thing is hurting you. I see how when this happens, you're spinning. You're not there for me. You're not there for the kids or whatever else like that. Right. And then I'm also and then the partner often, I have to drive you or I have to do this, or I'm part of this whole crazy, pattern and dynamic and everything. So there's so many layers that a toxic relationship, manifests itself in. And so I try to help people. I try to help them step back and say, what is in your best interest? And again, turning your back on a family member, no contact, setting back, again, I use the worst case scenario with someone who may be dying or very old and frail, but it's in any situation. You have to recognize, right? There are family obligations, there's sense of duty, there's sense of decency and so on, but at what cost? And that's where you need to step back and go, at what cost to me, to my partner, to my family? So to my well-being. So
anyway. and I know that you've seen exactly what I'm about to say here. And I think that those cultural factors that you mentioned are usually the hardest to overcome. Not to say that those obligations don't exist in the typical white North American family, but I do think that we can agree that the pressures are much stronger in, families who are from other countries, other cultures. I know in Asian culture specifically, there's this idea of filial piety, and exactly what you were saying before, where no matter how horribly parents have treated the adult children or when they were actual children, there is still this, non-negotiable responsibility to the parents that you must care for them. So that's a really difficult one for people to reconcile of, living in this world and in this culture, we know that frankly, we do have more options and we do have the ability to think it through, but being stuck between those two cultures is very difficult.
Right. And here's how I trump that. Okay. I just had this conversation just recently. Well, I've had it many times. I say that if I asked your parents or grandparents or the cultural whatever leaders, okay, why this should be, they would at some point, and I would lead them to this, they would bring up values. Right? It's about values. Values lead us. All right. So what I tell them is I say, okay, well, then what we need to do is I say we need to reframe this as I can have a number of values. And the top value, the number one value is well-being, personal well-being. That has to trump everything else. And you and I think we've had this discussion before. Being self-interested, A, it's what every single creature on the planet is, if they're healthy. And B, does not mean being selfish. It means taking care of yourself first. And we hope that if you take care of yourself first, the idea is so then you can take care of others. And if you're not taking, and so we learn this, the first thing we learn in any health or mental health field, right? You've got to be able to take care of yourself first. Then you can do right by others. So I say you have to prioritize that. And if you're, if whatever system you're living under, the cultural system, the filial piety, right? That you have to, prioritize them. Well, that's a value that they've tried to impose on you. Right. And that, again, as long as you say that my first value is my well-being, then whatever they've tried to do to you, you say that's going against that value. All right. They may not have done it on purpose. They may just be following tradition or custom or whatever. Okay. But you cannot let them, nobody should impose a value on you. You should be able to, you can take it in, you can learn from it, whatever, but you should be able to have your own list of values. And I tell them, I say, look, some of these things that we're talking about, these were from, thousands of years ago or whatever. Times have changed. And then I started talking about the value of adaptability. You got to be able to adapt. Anyway, so that's what I talk about with that. And so that's with, again, the worst case scenarios. With any other situation, I tell them, once again, it's the same thing about prioritizing your well-being. And then being able to have, whether it's a handwritten letter, whether it's an email, whether it's a text. I hate text. Emails to basically cut a family member off through text just seems almost tacky. It's like breaking up through text.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. Right. A letter or an email just somehow seems a bit more, I don't know, has a bit more gravitas than a text. Okay. Or I say to people, you give them the whole letter or whatever and say, if you want to discuss this in person, I'd be happy to do that. But you lay it all out written first because people, right, especially when we're having those old triggers from childhood and we feel like a child, we get frozen up and you can't say it. I've seen people do this when I do family therapy and so on. I see them revert to that child. They just can't, right? Put it all on paper and say, okay, and when we meet, we're going to bring this document so we can talk about it. But at least it's all laid out. The boundaries are set. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to pen by that. The boundaries are set, and and this is what has to happen. And telling the person, look, if you care about me, it's going to sound like you're guilting, but you're not guilting. You're just laying out the facts. If you actually do care about me, like you say, then why would you want me to suffer? And if what, you're telling me that having a relationship with me is suffering? Well, yes, the way it's going, yes, it is. And I don't want that. And so again, this, by the way, this is the pre-cutting off part where you're trying your damnedest to make sure it doesn't get to that and saying, that's the last thing I want. Like this is up to before that. Because as I said earlier, if you do all of that, if you lay it out and say, this is tearing me apart, this is breaking me, I can't sleep at night. My marriage is falling apart. I'm going to lose my job because I'm so stressed out. So all I want to do is be able to mend this, make it work. And if you say all of that in a humble, respectful, civil, and compassionate manner, and the person still can't deal with that, then you can say, I did everything I could.
Yeah.
Now it's time for no contact.
Yeah. And that is the sad reality of it, is that despite one's best efforts, sometimes it's not going to change. Kind of a silly analogy, but I'll use it. So I broke a nail this morning and I was sitting there and filing it and filing it. I'm like, maybe if I just like do this, or maybe if I file this corner of it, it'll look fine. No, it looks like garbage and I should have just cut it off in the first place. But I use this analogy because that's the same thing that happens in families, is that oftentimes like, well, maybe if I take this angle, or maybe if I try this, or maybe no, just sometimes you just need to stop, acknowledge that you did the best that you could, and other people's behavior is outside of your control. We only have control over what we do, what we say, and sometimes how we feel. And if others aren't willing to play ball, then so be it. But that can't be internalized, and easier said than done, but can't be internalized as a failure on one's own behalf, because unfortunately, this is how families can be. With your letter writing suggestion, I just worked on this with a client the other day. And what we worked on was writing a letter that she's actually going to read to her mom. So similar idea, but at least it'll kind of keep her on track. It'll be a little bit more eloquent than just going in and talking about it, freely, because like you said, that can be, very upsetting and people can shut down in those situations. But I think the theme of what we're saying, maybe let's add into the drinking game, prepared. Going in prepared with these conversations is incredibly important.
Right. And it goes back to wuye or wuya, which is, again, if this is someone that you've known for all of your life, whether it's a sibling, parent, or whoever, right? Being prepared means knowing who this person is and not lying to yourself and not wishful thinking. It doesn't help anybody. Okay. Having hope and optimism is one thing, but it's got to be at least based in some kind of reality. And if you know the person, being prepared, as you say, whether it's because that goes back to Uye. If I know I'm going to talk to somebody and try to just, tell them how I'm feeling or whatever, if I know them well enough, I know that they're either going to cut me off or they're going to turn things around or they're going to try to guilt me or whatever else. And that's going to throw me off. So there's no shame in saying, knowing all of this, I will come prepared. I will write the letter ahead of time. I will say, please, okay, let me finish. Or, if they cut me off, say, no, please, just sticking to your guns, sticking to your boundaries, and just making sure. And again, I keep using this word boundary because I want people to understand that it's not a bad thing. Boundaries are not barriers. Only worst case scenario are they. Until that point, all you're doing, I'll say it one more time so people can really get it. All you're doing is doing what any person has the right to do in any dynamic, which is saying, here is my expectations, needs, limits, and so on, right? And please respect them, just like I will do yours, right? By the way,
and boundaries exist so we can have a relationship with people.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Without that, what is it? Right. Now, by the way, of course, this is for interpersonal things. I'm not talking about at work. Yes, you can't go to your boss and say, well, here's my limits. And all right. I mean, you can to some degree, but anyway, I'm talking about interpersonal. So, so I know we've been talking about this quite a bit, or I have. Getting back to Christmas and the holidays and everything, the other thing that some people say was, well, but I don't celebrate Christmas. So well, then pick whatever. This applies to any special, supposedly special time. What I can't think of a whole bunch of different ones, but it doesn't matter. It's about you and I were talking about family. We're talking about expectations. We're talking about boundaries, which in theory, by the way, if you're going to try something new, if you're going to try to assert yourself or please people less, okay, or try to cope with your guilt or anything, in theory, family is where you're supposed to be able to do this the first place, right? They're supposed to be the safe space for you to be able to do that in theory. And so if it's not that place, then what does that tell you? Okay, then that gives you further impetus to set stronger boundaries without guilt. And once again, I'm going to say it sounds great. And by the way, I said earlier today, I keep saying this all the time. I know it's only words, but the sooner you start committing to those words, the sooner you start reframing, the sooner you start incorporating a new narrative to yourself, eventually you will be able to have a healthier dynamic with other people. You will be able to put those boundaries or no contacts when you need to be, when you need to do so. And you'll be able to do all of that without the guilt. It's not to be some jerk or whatever else like that.
No.
Right. It's just, again, prioritizing yourself, not to be selfish and mean or whatever, but to maintain your well-being.
Absolutely. So I think we've spent the whole episode talking about what people can do with all of this.
Right.
But, to summarize that, identify what some of your triggers are. Recognize that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Recognize that, sometimes, despite your best efforts, things may not go the best, but you got to put your own self-interest first, because you can't function healthily if you're not doing so. And I guess something I'll add here is ensuring that you have strong social supports outside of the family. I think that's incredibly important too, because as the old cliche goes, we don't pick our family, but we certainly can pick our friends, and we can pick the people who are supportive and kind and understanding of who we are. And if we're lucky enough to have that, it can make some of these family dynamics a little bit more tolerable.
Right. And to that point, just something to call back to something I said earlier about having a partner or something like that, or a family member, something like that. Having them outside is good. And it's even better if within that system, you have that person, including your partner, and having these discussions with them, being vulnerable with them and saying, look, this is going to be really tough if I'm seeing my parent or even the in-laws, maybe just you're the unit. If you have a partner, you are the unit, and you need to make sure that when you go into the battlefield, you have each other's backs. Okay. And one thing we didn't talk too much about, I know we're kind of going over time, about loneliness and everything like that. It can be a really terrible time for people, if they don't have the family, or if they don't have the many friends or whatever. So all I'm going to add to that is there are groups, there are communities, there are ways that you can find that interpersonal connectedness. And anybody can sabotage any good thing. You can say, well, here I am sitting with a bunch of strangers. I'm such a loser. I don't even have family, whatever. Okay. Well, or you can frame it as, it's unfortunate that I don't have family, or I don't have a healthy family or a partner or whatever. But hey, I have the wherewithal to reach out. I spoke to somebody. Maybe it was only an hour on this day or whatever, but okay, I have to have some self-agency. I'm going to try my best. And for whatever reason, it's easier for others and it's very difficult for some people, right? But trying your best to say that, I can't control all these family members or these people who don't invite me to parties or whatever, but I will do my damnedest to find some way to connect with somebody. And it can be online, ideally in person, finding something again. But the person's tendency is normally to go, but it's not this, but it's not as good as that. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. As you say, recognize your tendencies and say, I know I want to do that, but I can't. I need to make the best of it. And if I make it through this season, this holiday or whatever, okay, maybe I'll spend the next 300 and some odd days trying to prepare for next year. And if it's not going to be with family or whatever else, I'm going to find a more enjoyable thing. Because if I plan ahead, there can be something that I will actually get some benefit out of.
Absolutely. Yeah. So listeners, we want to hear from you about this topic. Oren and I, again, like we started out with, know how difficult a time of year this can be for people because of all the things that we talked about today. So leave us your comments, leave us your thoughts, and we'd be happy to respond.
And on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.